I used to work for a very small tech firm about 5 or 6 years ago during the summer and fall months. Much of my work also involved doing stuff later on in the evenings and sometimes later in the night with servers and networking because of my experience in that field. I ended up being a catch-all guy instead of my boss, who was a cheapskate, hiring somebody efficiently for it. Because of this, I would often work really later shifts and ended up being a jack of all trades. My boss constantly refused to upgrade equipment and was therefore equipped with ill-fitted equipment. And since he didn't want to fork out the money to upgrade, servers were often crashing. Data would consistently need to be restored and sometimes lost. This put on a lot of extra work on my plate, but hey, I was getting paid decent money at the time, so I didn't mind too much. Besides the job, the building was out of town in a much woodsier part, closer to the mountains. I would always feel very uncomfortable leaving at nighttime, since I was the only person there, and when going to my car, I always felt like I was never alone, like somebody was lurking around, watching me. Although even with the minimal lights in the building, I never saw a soul. This happened almost nightly, and I worked a standard Monday through Friday. Sometimes I would start in the evening, 4 or 5, and sometimes not getting off till 2 or 3 in the morning, depending on my workload. Maybe a month or two in, it was summertime still, I began hearing strange noises, far off in the distance, maybe in the woods or something. I don't know. It was kind of like a very long, drawn-out moan, or something. It sounded deep, kind of like a woolly mammoth or something, maybe an elephant, or kind of like a very muffled elephant cry. Very freaky sounding, and there's really no animal I can pinpoint that would make it accurate. One night, when I was leaving, this would have been right around Labor Day. I remember that because my boss was gone the entire week. The sounds were non-existent. I never felt anything going out to my car. It was a nice change of pace. I was used to leaving, locking up, and running out to my vehicle to get it started as soon as possible. The nice thing was I didn't have to deal with any of that entire week. It was either Thursday or Friday of that week. When I went out to my car, same thing, no noises, nothing. And I sat down, and I started my engine. But before I put the key in the ignition, and as I'm getting settled and my seatbelt on, I heard something very large charging in my direction. Immediately panicked. I looked around, didn't see anything. It's pretty dark around the building, and there are a few lights, but they don't give too much illumination. Somebody, technically if they wanted to, could park far down the road, hide behind the building, and charge me. Although it didn't sound like a person, unless that person was 700 pounds. This thing was heavy and fast, and it was gaining in my direction very quick, but I couldn't see anything. This was over the course of maybe 3-5 seconds, with it getting louder and louder and faster. I was panicked, turned the car on, and swerved and drove out of there, not even stopping. I fled down the street like a maniac. The sound stopped, and I kept checking my rearview mirror. I have no idea what that could have been. It sounded like a bison charging my way in the darkness. That was the last of that, though. When I returned the following Monday, the sounds ceased. I never felt any weird feelings going on at night, and when I eventually quit that job, about a week or 2 before Halloween, I never dealt with anything more since then, and I have no contact with anybody who I met at the job or my old boss, so I have no idea if any of those things persisted. But this will always serve as one of the strangest, most bizarre and freaky memories I've ever had. This last fall, I saw something straight out of a nightmare. I don't know what it was, and I can tell you for sure, this was not a misidentification, nor was it an animal that I've never seen before. This was something from hell, or so I believe. I was with my cousin, and I was visiting his house. My cousin lives in eastern Pennsylvania, right up around the mountains, or the Appalachian area. He's a real outdoorsy type. Me, not so much, but I enjoy hikes every now and then. He hunts and fishes and does all that stuff. At the time, he had just purchased a really high-end, very powerful spotlight and was using it to shine into the mass acres of woods he has far behind his house. It was pretty impressive. With that light, we could see a lot. I don't know anything about how much it cost, the power behind it, or the lumens. All I know, or can remember, is the light was about as big as him, and it took a lot of strength to be able to move it and change direction. I'm sure he spent a fortune on it. I believe he said something about mounting it to the back of his truck for night hunting, or whatever it is he was going to do. Don't quote me. Again, I'm not a hunter, so I don't know any of that stuff. But I was in the back with him, and we were shining it around to test it. He had just purchased it that day, and he wanted to see its full light capabilities at night, how far it could shine, and what. Like I already told you, him and I were both very impressed with how far it could cast into the woods, how much it illuminated. But that's also the most terrifying part, and I'll get to that in just a moment. He was shining it around in almost a full 360 to see the entire area of what he could and could not light up. Before I tell you exactly what him and I saw, let me give you a little geography of the area. Since he's right up against the Appalachians, behind and around his house is probably several acres worth of meadows. I'm terrible with knowing distance and lots and acres and all that, so I believe he said it was somewhere, maybe 5 to 10 acres. I could be wrong, but beyond that was thick forest, and of course the mountains. I mean, his property is right up against it, so there isn't a whole lot of room. The meadows are beautiful during the daytime, sprinkled loosely trees all around, and then if you go further back, those are the same woods that he goes hunting in. I believe his family owns all of that. I don't know how many acres or how much, but I think he said before. Quite a bit though, and I know he hunts in them every season when he can. The meadows almost kind of slope down or angle downwards, creating a mini valley, if you will. This way, when he shined his light downward or in that direction, it illuminates almost all the entirety of the meadow, and the tree line, if you will. On either side of his house is also meadow, but much, much smaller, with tree line encompassing much closer to his home. Even though he was able to shine his light in all directions, it was more so the back meadow, which had a greater effect, because there wasn't near as much covering, so the light illuminated much, much more. Alright, on to what it is that him and I both saw. As he's turning this giant light and shining it down in the meadow, he stops for a moment, in excitement, realizing just how powerful this light is, and that it was well worth every penny he paid for it with. I too was excited, because even though I wasn't into any of this stuff, I thought it was pretty cool, having a spotlight that was practically military grade with how much it lit up. But what do I know? As he let the light continue to shine in the meadow for another few seconds, him and I both gasped in horror at what we had saw. The tree line, which now was fully illuminated, was starting to rustle, and not just move slightly, like something big was going to step out. It being the hunting season, my cousin grew excited. Maybe it was going to be a large deer or a doe, but instead something else clambered out of the tree line. Something neither him nor I have ever in our lives seen, and we have never seen since. Whatever this thing was on 2 legs, looking just kind of like a hairy man. It was built like one. Very stocky, very thick tree trunk-like legs, a very thick muscular torso, and large muscly arms. It didn't have lanky arms at all, and it had big, large mammoth hands, but the head was far more strange. It didn't really have much of a neck, and the head was kind of set into the body. The head, which is hard to describe, looked more like a goat than anything else, but not like what you'd expect. I guess it would be far more appropriate to say it resembled a goat, except it looked all wrong. Ugly, horrible, maybe a goat from hell. It had a very large, open mouth, kind of like how an alligator does, where the mouth is almost the entire face, and it was full of rigid, sharp teeth. It had also a very hairy head, and had horns on top of its head. Not like devil horns. They very much resembled ram horns, where they kind of gnarl and twist, and point out towards the other side of it. We didn't see the eyes, nor was there any reflection, but this thing was tall, easily 8 or 9 feet, judging by where it exited out of the tree line. This thing stopped and stared back in the direction of the spotlight. Then, very slowly, almost carefully realized it was revealed, and turned sideways, and walked about 50 yards to the other side of the tree line, and disappeared, only looking back once, like it knew it was being watched, and it wanted to very quickly make an escape. My cousin and I were both shocked at what we saw, and terrified. The entire sighting, I want to say, lasted 10 seconds, maybe a little bit longer. We got a pretty good look at it, and this thing was hideous. For only being maybe 75 yards away, there wasn't a whole lot we could do. My cousin and I basically watched in horror as this thing shown itself, and then walked into the tree line. We weren't sure what to make of it, or what to even think. I nearly wetted my pants. My cousin and I went back into his house, and didn't really say much about it. I could tell he was freaked out. I was thoroughly scared. I mean, I have no idea what we just saw. Could this have been a goat man? Or maybe a minotaur? Although it looked nothing like you would see in pop culture the way it's depicted. A mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, and a head and eyes so sunken back in, it didn't really make much sense. Either way, it was demonic-looking as much as it was terrifying. Whatever it was, I never want to see it again. When I was 13, I used to go out all the time on our family pedal boat with my 2 older brothers, who were 15 and 17. There were various lakes we would go to, but I'll never forget the time that I, out of all 3 of us, saw what I believed to be a lake monster. Maybe a sea monster due to its size. Let me set the story up for you. We were all on the pedal boat, my parents on the shoreline, and we were maybe 200 feet out from shore. I can't be exactly too sure how far away we were, but like many times on a pedal boat, we'd keep getting stuck in not seaweed, but plants and stuff. It would keep getting stuck in the propeller, or whatever it is that propels the boat forward when you kick the pedals. I would kick one side, my brother would do the other side, and my oldest brother would help direct us in the front. Several times we'd keep getting stuck, so I would remain seated, and my 2 older brothers would go off on each side and try and pull as much of the lake weeds out of the propeller so we can keep going forward. At this point, we were probably maybe 100 feet, 200 feet, I don't know, a fair distance away from shore, and I don't know exactly how deep the lake was, but I'm sure fairly deep, probably well over 70 feet. We got stuck yet again, so both my brothers jump up to the left side and are trying to detangle things. As I'm sitting there waiting for this to happen, I notice off to my right movement in the water, when to my horror, I see what appears to be a large head popping up just so slightly out of the water. To give you a better description or analysis of the situation, the head was kind of reminiscent of Godzilla. Not that Godzilla's head popped out of the water, but a head that looked similar came to about the mouth line of this creature. The head was easily maybe 5 feet by, 2 or 3 feet. It looked very prehistoric, had white, sunken-in eyes, and a large, large mouth, full of probably 3 to 5 inch bladed, sharp teeth. This thing looked absolutely terrifying, like it came from the pits of the sea. It was a pretty large head, and it popped up slowly out of the water, stood there for a few seconds. As soon as I noticed it, I began screaming. That's when it very slowly submerged back underneath the water from whence it came. Unfortunately for me, it was too late. My brothers, who had ran to me because I was screaming, did not get a chance to see it. I tried to tell them what I saw, but they looked over, didn't see anything, nor could they see a shadow of anything, because the water was so murky. I told them we needed to get back to shore ASAP. So they were kind enough to take my advice, and we did. I never saw anything after that. We didn't have any issues getting entangled, and made it pretty safely back to shore. I told them, both of them, afterwards, I'm not getting back in that pedal boat again. There's something evil in that lake. They both laughed at me, but I told them maybe I was over-exaggerating with the word evil, but whatever it was looked like some sort of dinosaur-looking creature. It's really freaky. In fact, I actually found a picture online that I'm not sure if it's from a movie or what, but it looks nearly identical to the thing I saw in the water. I was looking online for lake cryptids to see if I can find anything, and although I don't think what I saw is in the video, the thumbnail of the video is almost identical to the creature I saw, and down to the teeth, to the way it's sticking above the water, to the way the head and eyes look. Nearly everything about it looks almost spot on. Makes you wonder sometimes. I wanted to share this story with you in honor of my late best friend who passed away back in early November from COVID-19. He would have done a much better job expressing the story, telling you every minute detail, and really building it up into something it should be listened to. An amazing story. But he only told me a couple of times, and so I will do my best to reiterate the story as I remember. And while I can't remember every single detail, the gist is that he went on a 10-day solo adventuring out in the wilderness of Alaska. On one of the days, in the late fall or winter, I believe. I could be wrong on the season, because I don't exactly remember in Alaska when the bears come out and are active, so I'm going to say fall. Plus, it wasn't cold enough that he was completely isolated and needed to completely survive. It would have been in the evening time, as the sun was setting, and he was bringing his fish back to his encampment about 3 miles away from the stream. When he described to me, what he saw was a large man-ape-like creature, probably 10 to 12 feet in height, a gigantic beast of an animal, killing and ripping the head off an adult male grizzly bear. I know that sounds intense, but that's what he told me. In fact, he even shook and sounded terrified when he talked about it, because such a thing does not exist in nature. He heard the commotion and was going up a tall ridge. When he followed the sounds a little more closely, he was able to look behind a tree and see down below where the commotion was going on. In a small clearing in between the trees, this man-ape thing was fighting off a grizzly bear. For what, I don't know, but he said he thinks it was its kill, because he said it had a doe slung over its shoulder, like it was carrying it back to its village or encampment, or wherever this thing lived. That's when the bear attacked it, and he said this man-ape thing grabbed the bear by the front paws, twisted them, nearly ripping them off in one sweep. Then it grabbed the grizzly bear by the neck and the head, and slowly tore the head off the body. The man-ape thing suffered a couple scratches, and even made some grunts and howls from being attacked, but it was over pretty quickly, without giving off much of a fight. If you don't know, adult grizzly bears are massive killing machines. They could take out a man no problem, and for this 10 to 12 foot tall ape-man creature to just take down an adult male grizzly bear, that's pretty terrifying. He told me that he believes it was an adult male grizzly bear, due to the size and girth. He wasn't able to clearly see the face or the front side of this man-ape thing. He said that the man-ape thing's back was facing him, and so its front was away from him, and he could see the bear coming up to it attacking it. And then it kind of shifted a little bit to the side, but more like diagonally, to where he still couldn't see the front or much of the face, just mainly the back. But even made the comment to me, even through all its thick hair, he could still see that it had rippling muscles, and was a gigantic beast of a creature. Very much like an overpowered man, or think of the Hulk, but instead of green, think of it as being covered in dark brown hair, and maybe not as overly muscled, but more human proportioned, and just very tall. After this thing took down the grizzly bear and ripped its entire head off, it terrified him so bad that he didn't stick around. In fact, he almost left all of his fish and ran back to his encampment, grabbed his revolver, and stayed in his camp without food or almost no water for the next 3 days, out of fear this ape-man thing would pay his campsite a visit. Although it never did, and he never reported feeling anything weird, smelling, hearing, or seeing anything out of place, other than that horrible sighting. That was about it. He cut his trip short by about 4 days, and decided to actually just leave everything. This man was out there in the bush, pretty far out there. There was no way there was any other soul around. If you know anything about Alaska and how remote the wilderness can be, then you would know that if he took his time to really go out there, miles and miles, it's pretty wild, and you become one with nature really fast. This was not this man's first time out in the Alaskan bush all by himself, surviving. He was training to be able to pull a 30-day stint of doing this, even working his way to surviving by himself in the wintertime, just to prove he could. Although after this happened, he stopped doing it entirely. This was a man who did not fear anything, at least nothing in the woods. He grew up in the woods, was very knowledgeable. He tracked, hunted, everything. So for him to tremble and be so terrified in the way he described, I can't help but believe what he truly had to say. It even bothers me. Unfortunately, his passing is just terrible, and he did not get a chance to retell this story, because I'm telling you, his version was so much more frightening, having seen the events he described to me firsthand. I didn't learn about the creature called a Dogman till I was later on in high school, when I had a first-on very violent encounter with one. It was my junior year of high school, and it was prom night. I was going to go pick up my girlfriend, who lived a little bit out of town, actually quite a bit out of town, on a long, windy road, scattered all with houses about, and a small church on the corner lot. When I arrived at my girlfriend's house, she was all ready, and her father came out with her to congratulate me and wish us a safe and happy time. When she got in the car, her father was on the porch waving to her, when his face turned pale and his eyes grew wide in the direction in the front of our vehicle. We both turned to see this mammoth-looking dog thing running towards the front of our vehicle, out towards the woods, jumping onto the hood and pressing its face right up against the windshield in one solid, fluid motion. Then, just like a person, struck its arm back and then shot its arm through the windshield, shattering the windshield in one go, grabbing a hold of my girlfriend and nearly tearing her arm off. While this was going on, her father runs in the house, grabs the shotgun, loaded with buckshot, which I guess he kept on hand, and shot this thing square in the face. Before this wolf thing could tear my girlfriend out of the car, he got a good shot on its face, and it scurried off, running, howling, and making all sorts of terrible noises. My girlfriend was badly bleeding, and if it wasn't for her seatbelt being clicked in, she would have been ripped out of the car. Although, between you and I, I really don't believe it was the seatbelt that kept her stuck in the car. I just don't think this thing had the chance yet to fully pull her out. Whatever in God's name we saw, we called 911, and an ambulance came to treat her wounds, and the police showed up too, questioning me and her father and her. They just took it down as a wild animal attack, and they said we clearly misidentified a wild rabid dog or possibly a bear, but from what we all three saw was this tall, I have no other choice but to say it, a werewolf-looking thing run out of the woods on two legs, jump on the hood of the car, and press its face hard against the windshield, like it was wanting to scare us. This thing was hideous looking. It was so ugly. Think like hyena, but not quite. And this thing was humongous. When it jumped on the front of the car from the ground, it not only dented the hood, which we tried to explain to the police that a rabid dog or bear could not do that, and would not jump off the ground, which they ignored, but would not indent the hood. So this thing had to weigh several hundred pounds. And what rabid dog or bear would go maniacal and shatter the windshield trying to get to us? They didn't exactly have answers to those, so they just tried to jot it down and write it off. The EMTs had to take her to the hospital, where she received stitches because her arm was torn so badly, nearly torn off the body. She was in the hospital for a few days, blood all over her dress, and her father and I all had to receive some pretty deep therapy over this animal attack, if you will. I feel I should just say this so you understand. I apologize if my retelling is ping-ponging and all over the place. It was an extremely traumatic experience for me, my girlfriend at the time, who we are no longer dating, but still remain good friends, and her father, who I also still talk to. This is a hard event to retell and talk about and think about. It brings up a lot of tough memories. I honestly thought afterwards that werewolves were real after seeing that thing, and that's what attacked us and came out of the woods. But shortly after, I would learn about a thing called Dogman and hear about the Beast of Bray Road and several encounters that would happen in Wisconsin and Michigan alike. That's what drew me and my girlfriend then, that the only conclusive answer was that we were attacked by one of these Dogman things. I don't feel like there's any other explanation. Having just turned 21 at this time, I decided to celebrate with a few friends in a small road trip in Northern California. We were on our way to Crescent City, which is tucked up in Northern California. We were driving pretty late. It was maybe 11 o'clock at night, and the path is a lot of mileage of thick, densely redwoods. Sometime during the night, or during the drive, this large bat-like creature swooped down in front of the road, nearly colliding with our car, and almost caused me to swerve off the road and hit a tree. All four of us in the car saw it as it swooped down into the road, turned to look at my oncoming vehicle, and nearly collided with us before quickly swooping back up in the air. This thing looked like a giant fruit bat, except much more uglier, and also had some human-like features, kind of like the face, except it had yellow glowing eyes, which was very creepy. When it landed, it also stood up on two legs just the same way a man would, and even turned to face our oncoming vehicle, like it knew what it was. It had a blank expression on its face, but I'll never forget just how scary this thing looked. Like it was not natural, like it came from another dimension. And I know I'm not crazy. How could I be? All four of us saw it, and when we recounted it to each other, there was no detail mismatch at all. We all saw the same thing, and to this day, don't talk about it. Oh, I should also mention, that was the last road trip I've been on. I'm now 37. I don't intend to drive to Crescent City ever again after that.